It is June 1945. A senior officer's interrogation facility near Bad Kissingen, Germany, sits under a quiet summer sun. Inside a small office, paper crinkles. General Lieutenant Heinrich von Bredow sits straight in his chair. He is 58 years old. He is an infantry general from Saxony, a career officer since 1907. His uniform is clean. His boots are polished. He looks across a wooden table at an American intelligence officer. Von Bredow reaches into his pocket and places a document on the table. It is a typed statement, 14 pages of clean black ink. The general clears his throat. He states firmly that he was never a Nazi. He states he never met Adolf Hitler. He claims his service was purely professional, a duty to the German nation, not to the political party. He looks the American in the eye. A single photograph will shatter his carefully rehearsed lie. This is the story of what Patton did when a German general claimed he never met Hitler, and the single photograph that shattered his carefully rehearsed lie. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories that show what happened when the loser still thinks he is the master. Captain Daniel Brenner was 33 years old, from Brooklyn, New York. He served as an intelligence officer in the United States Army, assigned to the processing and interrogation of high-ranking prisoners of war. Brenner was the American-born son of German Jewish immigrants who had fled the old world for the promise of the new. The war had exacted a terrible, intimate price from his family, as 3 of his first cousins in Germany had been rounded up and deported to Auschwitz in 1942, never to return. Brenner spoke fluent, flawless German, retaining the precise cadence of his parents' native tongue. For 2 long months, he had sat in damp rooms listening to captured officers rewrite their own pasts, hearing variations of the same apolitical excuse from roughly 80 different men. He had grown weary of the theater, but he had also grown meticulous, spending his late nights in the archives, matching arrogant faces to old propaganda film reels. His evening work had yielded a thick cardboard file on the man currently sitting across from him. General Lieutenant Heinrich von Bredow was 58 years old, a traditional infantry general from Saxony who had worn a military uniform since 1907. He joined the Nazi Party in 1934, an action he now claimed was an automatic bureaucratic enrollment completed entirely without his explicit consent. Von Bredow had commanded an entire division during the rapid invasions of Poland in 1939 and France in 1940, later driving his men into the freezing mud during the early stages of Operation Barbarossa. By 1943, his relentless execution of orders earned him a promotion to Corps Command and the Knight's Cross with oak leaves. He sat in the interrogation room, carrying the visible marks of unearned privilege, from his perfectly tailored field tunic to the clean silver trim on his collar. He believed the retreating forces had burned the records, leaving his wartime record clean and his reputation intact. He sat with his hands folded, entirely confident that the Americans had never seen the photographic evidence of his devotion. German war weapons, Gem Tui Ching analysis. German war weapons da noi không tìm thấy phản hồi từ Gemini, hay đợi AI hoàn thành câu trả lời. June 1945, a senior officer's interrogation facility near Bad Kissingen, Germany. The door opened without a knock. General George S. Patton stepped into the small, wood-paneled room. He did not smile. He wore his immaculately pressed olive-drab uniform. 4 silver stars gleamed on his collar and his helmet. At his waist sat the famous ivory-handled revolvers. Every man in the room stood at attention instantly. Captain Brenner saluted. General Lieutenant von Bredow snapped his heels together, his chin held high, trying to maintain the rigid posture of a Prussian corps commander. Patton did not look at him. He nodded to Brenner, then sat down at the small wooden table. He placed a thick manila folder on the bare wood. The room was perfectly silent except for the faint tick of a watch. Patton studied the German general for a long, cold moment. Patton spoke. His voice was quiet. It carried a sharp, metallic edge. General Lieutenant von Bredow, he said, I have read your statement. You claim you never met the Führer personally, and that you maintained a strict professional distance from the regime. General, my service was entirely military, von Bredow said, his voice steady. I had no political role. I served Germany, not the party. Patton leaned back slightly. General Lieutenant, would you describe your relationship with Adolf Hitler as distant? Strictly distant, General, von Bredow answered. I never spoke with him personally. I attended large ceremonies where he was present, of course, but I never had a personal conversation with him." "Never had a personal conversation?" Patton asked. "Never, General, to my recollection," von Bredow said. Patton opened his folder. He did not rush. He pulled out a large glossy photograph and slid it across the table. It rested between them under the harsh light. The image showed Adolf Hitler smiling broadly, shaking hands with von Bredow inside the Reichskanzlei. Von Bredow was wearing his full dress uniform with the Knight's Cross around his neck. They were looking directly at each other, clearly mid-sentence. "General Lieutenant," Patton said, his voice dropping an octave. "This is you," shaking hands with Adolf Hitler in July 1944. The Reichskanzlei photographer captioned it, "The Führer congratulates General Lieutenant von Bredow on his oak leaves decoration." They discussed the Eastern Front situation for approximately 20 minutes. 20 minutes, General Lieutenant. That is quite a never had a conversation. The color drained from von Bredow's face. His jaw tightened. "General, the photograph. I had forgotten that specific ceremony," he muttered. "It was a formal occasion. The handshake was merely protocol." Patton did not answer. He reached into the folder and slid a second photograph onto the table. This one showed Hitler and von Bredow leaning over a large map table, pointing at tactical lines. The date on the back was October 1943. "And this forgotten meeting?" Patton asked. "You appear to be advising the Führer on strategic matters." "I was asked to brief him on my corps' actions," von Bredow said, a bead of sweat forming near his temple. "It was a professional consultation." Patton did not speak. He pulled 3 more photographs from the folder and dropped them on the table. Then another 3, then the rest, 11 photographs in total. Each one captured von Bredow smiling with Hitler, walking with Hitler, receiving medals from Hitler. The paper scratched against the table like dry leaves. "General Lieutenant, I have 11 photographs in this folder," Patton said. 11 personal meetings, personal conversations, strategic consultations, award ceremonies where he pinned medals on your chest. Your claim of never met personally is a lie. Your 14-page statement is a lie. Your denazification application is a fraud." Von Bredow stared down at the sea of black and white evidence. He remained silent. "General Lieutenant, you have a choice," Patton said, his voice flat and absolute. "Option 1, revise your statement to accurately describe your relationship with Hitler and the Nazi regime, kind the 11 meetings, the kind your party membership, which you claimed was automatic, but which records show was a voluntary application in 1934. Dine your participation in the planning of operations on the Eastern Front. Tell the truth. Your processing will then proceed based on accurate information." Patton paused, letting the silence fill the room. "Option 2, Patton continued. "Maintain your current lies. We will use these photographs as evidence in your denazification proceedings immediately. You will be classified as a major offender and processed accordingly. That means immediate transfer to a maximum security enclosure, imprisonment until trial, and possible prosecution for war crimes related to operations on the Eastern Front. Choose." Von Bredow looked from the photographs to Patton's face. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. The German general's shoulders slumped. The Prussian posture collapsed. "I will revise my statement," von Bredow said. Captain Brenner placed a fresh stack of blank paper and a fountain pen on the table. Patton turned without another word and walked out of the room, his boots clicking rhythmically against the stone floor. Von Bredow sat down heavily. The room smelled of old paper, sweat, and the sharp ink from the pen. Outside the window, the engine of Patton's Jeep roared to life, then faded into the distance. For the next 4 hours, the German general did not look up. He wrote furiously, his hand shaking slightly, as he filled page after page with a tight, hurried script. He no longer spoke of professional distance. The new statement totaled 22 pages. It detailed every handshake. It documented the October mapping session. It confessed to the 1934 voluntary party application that he had hidden for months. He detailed his strategic consultations on the Eastern Front and concluded the document with a desperate, written plea for leniency in light of his full cooperation. Captain Brenner gathered the pages, checking each sheet before placing them into the official file. The public myth of the apolitical Wehrmacht general had evaporated on a single wooden table, witnessed only by a junior officer and the empty chair where Patton had delivered his terms. Captain Brenner delivered the 22-page confession directly to Patton's headquarters. Patton read the new document, initialed the final page, and filed it away without comment. Despite his written plea for leniency, von Bredow's extensive cooperation could not erase the documented reality of his wartime service. The Western occupation authorities classified him as a major offender. He was transferred to a high-security military prison, where he remained until his release in 1949. He returned to a quiet gray existence in a small town in Westphalia, where the local population knew nothing of his 11 handshakes with the Führer. He secured a low-paying position as an insurance clerk, counting figures in a dim office until his retirement. He died in obscurity in 1962. During his final years, von Bredow drafted a lengthy memoir intended to restore his name, but the manuscript was never published. His children inherited the typed pages after his death and discovered a single, bitter passage near the end. "I lied to General Patton about my relationship with Hitler," von Bredow had written. "He had the photographs. I had only my honor, which, as it turned out, was less than I thought." Finding the admission too humiliating for the family name, his children burned the manuscript in a backyard furnace. Patton himself never spoke of the interrogation to the press. He kept a duplicate set of the 11 photographs in the back drawer of his personal desk for the remainder of his life. In a letter to his wife dated 2 days after the incident, he noted simply, "The German generals are trying to rewrite the history of this war before the ink on the surrender is even dry. I met one today who forgot he had advised Hitler for 20 minutes. I showed him a picture of his own face, and his memory returned quite suddenly." Some historians argue that Patton's confrontational use of intelligence material was overly theatrical, bypassing standard judicial protocols for denazification in favor of a dramatic, personal ambush. They suggest that forcing immediate confessions under the threat of war crimes. Prosecution blurred the line between intelligence gathering and legal prosecution. Others argue the opposite, maintaining that such decisive measures were absolutely necessary to shatter the wall of denial constructed by the German officer corps. They contend that without absolute proof, the myth of the clean Wehrmacht would have hardened much sooner. What is certain is that the 22-page confession Patton extracted remained a permanent part of von Bredow's official military record, preventing him from ever holding public office or military command in the post-war era. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have done the same, or would you have left the investigation to standard civilian denazification boards? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about when the loser still thinks he is the master, make sure to subscribe.